Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us this afternoon in our inaugural conference that's supported by the Mayor of London, London's Early Years Research Conference. I'm Julian Grenier. I'm Director of East London Research School. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before I hand over with great pleasure to the Mayor. Just to say we're running from 2 to 6 p.m. If you have any questions, please use Q&A on Zoom. You won't be able to unmute or show your screen. We won't be able to answer raised hands, but if you use Q&A or alternatively tweet #LondonEY, we'll be keeping an eye on everything. We'll have time for Q&A at 4:15 and again at 5:30 p.m. I can't tell you how delighted, honoured and privileged I am to hand over now to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Julian, thanks for that introduction. It's fantastic to join you all and be able to be at today's London's Research Conference for the early years on the hottest day of the year, I hasten to add. I want to begin by thanking you, Julian, for your kind introduction and for the brilliant work you're doing at Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre. Those that don't know, I also want to congratulate Julian on recently being awarded a CBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours for his services to education and childcare, a magnificent achievement. I bet, Julian, had you gone to the service on that Friday, you wouldn't have been booed the way our Prime Minister was. Can I begin by thanking everyone involved in staging this conference and to all the nursery staff and childminders in attendance for everything that you do. It's wonderful to see so many joining this conference. The last time I checked, 220 participants at this conference. Nothing could be more important than the welfare, well-being and futures of our children. You play a crucial role in supporting their development, shaping their characters and unlocking their imaginations. And in doing so, not only do you have a hugely positive impact on their prospects, but by helping to raise the next generation, you also make a substantial contribution to the strength and success of our city. And never has this been more true than at the height of the pandemic, when your exceptional efforts meant that our transport workers and hospital staff and many others could continue doing their jobs, keeping our city moving and ensuring those with COVID could receive the care they needed. By providing this essential public service at a time of crisis, childcare for your fellow key workers, as well as a vital lifeline for vulnerable children and families, you undoubtedly went above and beyond what anyone could expect of you. And for that reason, there's no doubt in my mind that you are among the unsung heroes of this pandemic. So again, thank you. As Mayor, it goes without saying, I'm determined to support you and your sector, because the first years of our lives are truly precious. And it's true that the earlier a child starts to learn, the better they do later in life. Access to high quality childcare is crucial for our city and our communities. Not only does it underpin our economic success, but it also helps to tackle gender inequality. It helps to promote social cohesion, and it helps to address the terrible social disparities that we see. London does have a lot to be proud of when it comes to early education and childcare. Children in our city now consistently rank amongst the highest performers in the country, a fact which clearly speaks to your hard work, passion and commitment. But of course, we can always do even better, which is why this conference today is so valuable. Let me end my short remarks by saying this: with your collective energy and expertise, we can make progress on developing evidence-based policy and ways of working that allow us to help those children who are most at risk of falling behind, at the same time as raising standards across the board. From City Hall, I'll continue to do everything I can to support this mission, whether it's by investing in programs like our early years hubs, lobbying the government for more funding for your sector, or acting on the latest research presented at this conference. Yes, look, we face some big challenges, but honestly, I'm optimistic that together we can make a real difference. We can improve the life chances of all of our children, and we can build a better London for everyone, one that is fairer, more successful, and more prosperous. Can I thank you again for joining today, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sadiq. That was really kind of you as well to add that personal touch there. I'm sure there are one or two people who might boo me on my way somewhere, but I've been delighted to hear such warm words. You know, as we welcomed our children into nursery today, we saw them walking, cycling, scooting along a healthy school street. And we've depended on the support of the Greater London Authority, the Mayor, and also the Mayor of Newham, Roxana Fiaz, to achieve that healthy school street. As the children came in and played in our garden, the pollution levels are lower than they would otherwise be because the Mayor funded us to have a green screen. So we know that it truly does take a village to raise a child, and we're all here collectively to do the very best for our youngest children in London. And that's why we are delighted to have so many hardworking early years practitioners online with us today, taking time out, we know, from very, very busy and demanding roles. And again, just to echo the words of the Mayor, really the fourth emergency service, the early years teams that kept London going through the worst days of the pandemic. And I'm delighted now to hand over to the Mayor of Newham, to Mayor Roxana Fiaz. Very warm welcome to you.
Similarly, and likewise, Julian, just really want to echo the words of the Mayor of London, Sadiq, in his impassioned contribution to kickstart this really important conversation and conference this afternoon, of your superb advocacy over the years around the importance of a really quality early years frame and anchoring that every single child, wherever they may live and whatever their backgrounds, rightly and justly deserves. And I wanted to also just commend you, Julian, because over the last 4 years in my role as a first term mayor, I have seen firsthand the passion and the dedication that you have manifested in your delivery of this really important agenda at our Sheringham primary school here in the London Borough of Newham. And I remember when I first went to visit the primary school, and this would have been probably 2019 with Joanna, who's going to be on one of the panel debates, because Sheringham School is also one of the designated early year hubs that is supported by the GLA and the Mayor of London. And I was absolutely amazed at the diligence and the granularity of intervention and service provision that we're providing in a really challenged part of our borough, not least challenged because of issues of poverty and inequality, but also that air quality point that you made. It's amongst our worst pollutant neighbourhood in the north of the borough, and it represents one of several neighbourhoods and areas in Newham, the 9th largest local authority in the country, where those toxic, life-threatening particulates that are in our air exceed the World Health Organization limits. So I just really wanted to commend you also, Julian, both you and the entirety of your staff team, the leadership team and the governing board, of the focus that you've also placed on that. Look, I know that I have no more than 5 minutes, so I'm going to be really brief. I just really wanted to welcome the fact that this important set of conversations are happening this afternoon. I'm really interested about what's emerged from the diligent, robust, evidence-based work that the East London Research School has undertaken, which has been funded by the Education Endowment Foundation. And I'm really proud to be here to advocate for the amazing work that our Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre in Newham has been pursuing, because it's very reflective of the commitment under my administration of the importance that we must and need to place on ensuring that those all-important foundational early years of any child's life are enhanced, are supported, are all about enabling a young person to reach, yes, their full potential as it pertains to educational outcomes, but also how they develop as an individual and as a positive contributor to the wider community, but also in relation to health and how we can enable their families and their parents to support us in that, in terms of their crucial parent roles. And I've always been amazed at the contributions that all of our nursery schools have made, but by far the pioneering and leading work that Sheringham is undertaking with really valued partners, experts from across academia. And I really wish I could listen to Iram Siraj, the Professor of Child Development and Education at Oxford, with her contributions, but it's absolutely first class. And it is, again, another manifestation of the importance that all of us here in Newham, whether you're from the council, whether you're a political representative, but all of those important anchor partners, not least our school community, place on the importance of early years support and the interventions to help ensure that children's development is enhanced, and even more so important at this current point, given the impact of COVID-19 in not enabling a normalcy around children's environments as it comes to their early years development. And we're researching or funding a 2-year programme led by the East London Research School to provide support to settings to help children in the early years to develop their communications, not least because of the impact of COVID-19. I'm going to pause there, but just really to end by commending you once again and everyone on this Zoom chat for all the important and fundamental work that you're doing to ensuring all of our young people have the best, optimal and amazing start in life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And for all of the over 300 people we've got with us now, you know, if you're someone who's been working frontline in early years and you felt that people haven't paid tribute to the incredible work you've been doing over the last few years, how wonderful to hear both mayors thanking all the early years staff on the ground for their exceptional activities, commitment, dedication and love for the children that we work with. So Sheringham Nursery School, which is here in Newham, also leads the East London Research School, which is funded by the Education Endowment Foundation, all about bringing the best quality research and evidence to make a difference to children's lives on the ground every day, every hour in their early years setting. That's what our research school here is all about. I'm really pleased to welcome next Professor Becky Francis, who's CEO of the Education Endowment Foundation. Now, Becky's not in the country at the moment, but she's kindly left us with a video address, which we've really been enjoying listening to here at East London Research School. So with hopefully not too much faffing around as I share my screen, we're going to hear from Becky, who is one of the world's leading researchers into education, including early years education. So here is Becky Francis, Chief Executive Officer of the Education Endowment Foundation.
Hi, I'm Professor Becky Francis. I'm CEO of the Education Endowment Foundation, and it's a real pleasure to be here and talking to you today. Now, it's very well established that high quality early years provision plays an important role in a child's educational development. And that's particularly true for children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds, where, of course, that input can reduce educational inequality. And we all know that the pandemic resulted in the closure of early years settings to most children between March and June 2020, with many not returning to settings when lockdown eased that summer. Children starting school following the first lockdown were doing so after a period of instability and atypical experience. That's, of course, environmental experiences and social experiences too. And that disruption to education continued through the following autumn term and into 2021. Now, we recently published the results of research conducted by a team from the University of York, NISA and the EPI, and that was carried out with reception pupils over the academic year 2020 to 2021, aiming to understand the experiences of September 2020 school starters in comparison to previous cohorts. The study involved a total of 94 schools, over 1,000 families, and data from a total of more than 3,000 children. And the headline figure from that research was a drop in the proportion of the sample of children who'd reached a good level of development compared to the national pre-pandemic levels. It was a drop of 13% compared to the cohort of 2019. So you can see that drop to 58% reaching the good level of development, meaning that only just more than half of pupils were meeting the expected standard at the end of reception. And this is critical because we know that the early years are such a crucial time for children's development, both in terms of their attainment outcomes and their social and emotional well-being. So it's particularly concerning that fewer children reached expected levels of development by the end of reception. So much of this might be pointing out the obvious to you as practitioners who've had to contribute so much through the last few years and have seen that direct impact of the pandemic and the ongoing inequality through your day-to-day experience. But research evidence can help us understand the challenges, and it can be a good starting place in thinking about potential solutions. And that lies at the heart of the EEF's work and mission to close the disadvantage gap through closing the evidence gaps. Alongside the recent report, we also published our Moving Forwards Tackling Disadvantage guide, which included the tiered approach, a helpful model that can supplement school leaders' decisions regarding the allocation of funding, but also time, training, and energy, of course, as well. High quality teaching every day for all children is the most important factor when it comes to improving attainment outcomes, particularly, again, for socially disadvantaged children. And we know from several decades of research that early childhood education and care has a positive impact on children's educational, cognitive, behavioural and social development. That's true both in the short and the long term, with greater benefits if that provision is high quality. So what does high quality provision look like? Well, to quote Iram Siraj and colleagues, and of course you'll be hearing from Iram later today, she says there's an increasing recognition that the relationship a child has with a teacher or caregiver that's both sensitive and stimulating is the central and most critical component of early care and education. So relationships matter, interactions matter. The evidence consistently identifies the importance of socially meaningful interactions. High quality interactions often look effortless, but they're not easy to do well. And that's something that at EEF we're very aware of. And led by our early years content specialists, we've produced some materials to help distill important areas of evidence down for early years professionals. These materials include a simple, memorable set of evidence-informed strategies that can be embedded into everyday practice with a catchy mnemonic, the Shrek approach. These Shrek strategies encourage adults to be more responsive to children, and they encourage children's active participation in meaningful, stimulating, and linguistically rich back and forth conversations. Now, Melissa and Fliss from the East London Research School and Sheringham Nursery are going to explore this in more detail in another session with you today. But this is just one small example of how evidence can support us all to make decisions and support our shared commitment to improving practice for the benefit of all children, especially the most disadvantaged. Now, we know that resources are precious across education. We see pressures on funding and pressures on staff, particularly through the pandemic. So this makes it even more important that we make the most of these resources and our precious time with children. For us, that's why we're so committed to supporting decision makers and practitioners at every level to use evidence, alongside their professional expertise, of course, to inform their choices and improve teaching. We've reflected this commitment through our increased emphasis on the early years in our research agenda and in our guidance support as well. And that commitment will continue going forward. For example, we expect to launch an updated early years toolkit in the next academic year. We also know that the DFE are committed to spending a considerable sum through their early years recovery package in the next 2 years. We hope that that can support the use of evidence-informed practice and contribute to the continued development of the evidence base in the early years settings as well. And we're going to try to help support them to do that. That leads me then to my call for action. Now, the pandemic's brought significant challenges to schools and settings, as I've said, and that includes to our staff and colleagues, but perhaps most of all to children. So we need to work together to continue to respond and help in the best ways that we can. My strong belief is that evidence is the best way to do that, to support professionalism and expertise across the sector. So let's strive together to start from the existing evidence about what to do and how to help and put that into practice. I encourage you to use the EEF website, look at our toolkit, sign up to our newsletter that provides information on good practice, and look at what work centres, resources and so forth provide anywhere where there's high quality evidence. And do please provide us with feedback on how we can continue to improve and how we can support you better. Let's see this as a way of continuing to build the evidence base for the future too. We at the EEF hope that we'll be able to provide many opportunities to get involved in our evidence generation work, including participation in our trials over the next few years as well. I wish you all a brilliantly stimulating conference and look forward to working together to use the evidence to support life chances for all our children, irrespective of their background, because as we both know, this has never been more important. Thank you.
Okay, so really important words there from Becky Francis, and we're going to be building on a lot of those themes from Becky's contribution in a moment. Apologies if your sound was interrupted a bit by me replying to people's questions. Thank you to whoever muted me then. If you've got questions or thoughts, please put them in the Q&A, or you can tag us on Twitter, #LondonEY. We won't be taking points from people raising hands, but we will keep an eye on Q&A and on Twitter, and we will have 2 opportunities to put questions to panelists. So, hot off the Q&A, someone is asking, what is this about Shrek? And I'm very pleased now to hand over to Fliss James, who is one of our evidence leads in education, and Melissa Prendergast, also an evidence lead in education, both also on the ground teachers here at Sheringham Nursery School who are with young children every day. And Fliss and Melissa are going to be talking us through the work they've been doing to support children with their early communication. So over to both of you now.
Thank you, Julian. Just get my slides ready to go. Yep, so that's right. Fliss and I are going to be talking to you about supporting children with their early communication. Improving communication and language really matters for all children, but it is especially important for the most disadvantaged. We know that oral language skills are fundamental to children's learning, thinking, and emotional well-being. Being a good communicator is essential to children's play, and it is also crucial for making friends, resolving conflicts, and expressing their needs. Early language skills are one of the strongest predictors of later development through school and in life. So, for example, a child with poor vocabulary at 5 is more than twice as likely to be unemployed at age 34. So therefore, there is a real moral imperative on us as early years practitioners to take action. We need to combine our professional knowledge with what educational research is very clearly telling us and use strategies that we know will make a difference to children's communication and language. So I'm going to very briefly discuss some of the key pieces of evidence that highlight the importance of prioritizing the development of communication and language. The common theme in all of this research is the importance of socially meaningful interactions. And as Becky has already highlighted, the evidence is suggesting that there is an increasing recognition of the quality of the relationship between children and adults. It is critical that this relationship is sensitive and stimulating. So therefore, we really face a challenge. There is evidence to suggest that procedural teacher talk dominates early year settings. This talk is primarily concerned with instructions like get your coat, sit on the carpet, do this, do that. It's adult talk that is about just getting things done throughout the day, rather than having dedicated time to have meaningful conversations with children. And by that, I mean socially meaningful conversations that are contextually rich. So high quality interactions are really important. We want to be talking to children rather than at them. But as Becky pointed out, it is not as easy as it looks. How do we make sure that the language children are hearing is responsive and stimulating and not overly concerned with instructions and managing the day? This is the question that we wanted to address in our project Manor Park Talks and its new iteration this year, New Communication Project. So as part of Manor Park Talks, an effective strategies review was carried out to explore the evidence around what are the most effective pedagogical strategies that support communication and language for children aged 2 to 5. 3 themes emerged which actually connect back to those ideas around relationships and the adult's role. So the first theme is about paying attention in our interactions to children's social and emotional well-being and development. This seems to really contribute positively to language development. The second theme is that adults need to be an active partner in that conversation process. So that means things like modeling, scaffolding, listening, and creating spaces for joint engagement. The third theme is that these interactions need to be stimulating. And that means thinking about using lots of words of varying complexity. Children need to hear these regularly and they need to be repeated in many different contexts. From around 3 years, talking to children about things and events beyond the here and now, such as what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow, really supports vocabulary development, and this is known as decontextualized talk. So finally, there is this increasing evidence to suggest that quality is more important than quantity. It's not just about how many words children hear. It is so much more complex than that. But what we do know is that back and forth interactions, which are sometimes called serve and return interactions, form the foundations for language and cognitive development. The number and quality of the conversations children have with adults and peers throughout the day in a language-rich environment is crucial. We know that the length of time that children spend in multi-turn conversations predicts better language outcomes. So multi-turn conversations are key. Now, we have distilled all of this evidence into 4 evidence-informed, memorable, practical strategies, and these have formed the basis of our Newham communication project. Becky has highlighted the Shrek approach, and that sits along 3 other strategies within our project, which are comment more, question less, the 10-second rule, and shared book reading. And I'm going to hand over to Fliss now, who's going to talk about these and the Shrek approach in more detail.
Thanks, Melissa. So, as Melissa has summarised, we have all this rich, robust educational research that all points to the crucial foundational importance of prioritising the development of children's communication and language. This research tells us what the most effective strategies are. But the key is, so what? What does that mean for early years educators? What does this mean for us working with those children? A childminder, reception teacher, even parents. And we also have to think about our unique context as well. So as Becky has already kind of highlighted as well, we need to be thinking about how we bridge this gap between the evidence. We want to provide something that we can use every day, something that is accessible, something that is actionable, something that can make a difference to children's lives. And so as you can see in Becky's call to action, she highlighted our graphic that we've developed with the EES, the Shrek approach. And the aim of this approach is to equip early years professionals with this simple, memorable set of these evidence-informed strategies that can be embedded in everyday practice. And these are really powerful strategies, many that you will know and be familiar with and be confident using already. But the key thing is that these powerful strategies can be used with every child, every day. And that's what we really want to focus on, thinking about these powerful strategies with every child, every day. So the first of these strategies is share attention. And that's the beginning of Shrek. So you can see from the first part of the graphic, the adults down at the child level. Showing genuine interest in what a young child is focused on is a powerful way to establish a connection. It lets them know that you value them, that you want to spend time with them. And so getting down to their level, engaging in their choice of activity, you can tune in and crucially pay attention to what they're looking at, what they're doing, what they say. Sensitively joining in with a child's playing activity really motivates children to communicate with you. And the key thing about that relates again to Iran's quote around understanding the essential and critical importance of sensitive and stimulating relationships with key adults, that sharing of attention. The second strategy, the R, is for respond. So respond. How can we respond to a child once we have established this joint engagement? And how we do that is dependent on our knowledge of them as a unique individual. Sensitive, supportive, stimulating responses need to be adaptive and informed by our understanding of each child's development. So if we think about what might this look like, what might an attuned response look like? Well, responding involves noticing how the child communicates, acknowledging their verbal or non-verbal communications warmly. It really does involve being aware of your own body language, posture, and how you present. So these responses can involve making appropriate eye contact, looking expectantly, nodding, smiling, and equally, an attuned response could be verbal, could be narrating the child's activity. So offering a relevant comment that describes what the child can see, hear, or feel. Really, really powerful. So then that moves us on to the third strategy, expand. And this is really where these rich interactions can really develop further. Really think about how once we're engaged in this back and forth rally of engagement, there's serve and return interactions that often characterized as tennis or ping pong. So once that rally is getting underway, the adult and child are sharing attention, paying close attention to the same thing, and the adult is responsively following the child's lead, really thinking about their interests. So this is where the expansion happens, where the modelling and scaffolding begins with the adult pitching their language just above the level of the child. So let's think of an example. If a child gives a one-word response, such as dog, then actually the adult should expand on what they say by repeating and building on this utterance by adding a few more words. This helps children to understand more complex language. If the child says dog, the adult can say, yes, it's a small brown dog or a big friendly dog. You're giving them extra information, extra ideas, extra words. You're elaborating. And your knowledge of the child will inform what kind of keywords may be helpful to model, because we're always just pitching it just above their level. That really important scaffolding. Also, a part of that expansion could be about thinking, well, how can I articulate the link between what the child is currently doing, their activity, and some previous learning or experiences? So again, that is dependent on your knowledge of that child and your context and your professional expertise. So let's get to the fourth and final strategy of Shrek, RC, not the K, which is important to flag up that we have so we don't get sued. Conversation. It's so powerful, isn't it? It's the same back and forth conversations that involve many terms are the goal. And Melissa talked through that evidence that really highlights the power. The beauty and power of conversation is that conversation offers children an opportunity to practice talking and to receive that feedback from an adult. So to encourage rich back and forth conversations, the other two strategies that Melissa highlighted that kind of run alongside, that we weave in to the Shrek approach, is thinking about commenting more and questioning less. And also, absolutely critically, always thinking, give children time to listen, process and reply. Sometimes we refer it to as the 10-second rule. It is important to note, though, that questions are important and useful in helping children to cue turn-taking in conversation. We need to consider how to use conversation sparingly so that they are most effective. And we want to move away from closed questions which only result in a yes or no answer, or questions that the adult already knows the answer to, such as what colour is it? So let's think about those open questions. They are the most useful as they invite children to elaborate, and that's what we want. We want to elicit more talk. As children's conversational skills develop, adults can sensitively challenge children, shape the conversation to incorporate more abstract topics that are removed from the here and now, to support that decontextualised talk that Melissa highlighted. These strategies can also be used in lots of different contexts, and that's what we think is the beauty of the Shrek approach as well. We're currently leading on a project around shared book reading, about using picture books to support children's mathematical thinking and learning. And we're using the Shrek approach to guide those conversations. So we're going to show you get a sneak preview of a video that has been created by the Education Endowment Foundation that was filmed at Sheringham Nursery School and shows a snippet of the 4 strategies in action.
Oh, a sandwich. Oh, I love sandwiches. That smells good.
Yeah, because it got some orange to make it yummy and sweet.
It's got some orange peel inside to make it yummy and sweet. You're rolling it with your hands to make a ball. Yeah, that's right. Yours is quite a small ball.
I'm just using a very big.
You can make it bigger, can't you? You could add some more dough and make it bigger. You can have a go with your pestle and mortar. Liam's Your cinnamon stick has broken into pieces.
We see how Rahima pays close attention to what Liam is interested in.
This one is already broken. Do you want to try another one, Liam? I wonder what else we have in our pots. Aaliyah, do you want to have a go at smelling your cinnamon stick that you've crushed?
So there is a little snippet of the video, and we've got a slightly longer video that shows some more of those strategies in action. And at the end of that video, it just highlights the guidance report that underpins some of the research that we've been thinking about. So to sum up, this is our call to action. We know what's important. We know that there has been, significant impact caused by the pandemic, and we know that disadvantaged children have been even more affected. So we have a moral imperative to ensure that we are doing everything we can to prioritise the development of children's communication and language. We know the impact that it can have on children's life. So let's focus on what matters. Let's focus on the power of loving, sensitive and stimulating interactions. By using the Shrek approach, we can empower adults to develop the skills to help children become more confident, independent, and more powerful communicators. It's important to really think about making space and time to have these rich interactions and conversations, because it may mean we have to stop doing some things in order to do better things. As Dylan Williams said, sometimes we need to stop doing good things in education and give time to even better things. We think listening to children and having conversations with them are even better things to be doing. This is what we want to focus on. This is our call to action, and you can use the Shrek approach to support you. If you want to find out more, we're going to be sending out an email with links to a blog that's been written, and also we've got a webinar and some other important information to really help you understand it even further.
Thank you so much to Fliss, Melissa, and everyone across Newham in our hardworking PVI nurseries who's supporting Newham Communication Project, and really the dedication that's being shown to young children to help them develop their communication is really exceptional to see, and it's a testament to Fliss and Melissa's leadership. It's also a testament to the incredible early years practitioners that we have working in London who are so determined to get the best for all of our children. We've had a couple of questions on the chat. One is about sharing information with parents. If you look at East London Research School's blog, you'll be able to see that we've blogged a bit about how we've shared our research with, shared this sort of information with parents, which has really been about making sure that information is accessible, short, and shared with parents in a way that parents welcome it. So really big thank you to Fliss and Melissa there. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Aaliyah Campbell. I met Aaliyah when she was working with the Anna Freud Centre, doing some exceptional work around children's emotional development and well-being in the early years. Aaliyah is now children's wellbeing practitioner in Camden. We're very pleased to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Julian. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. So like Julian said, today I'll be talking about supporting children with their emotional well-being, and particularly the early years, and what we can do as early years practitioners. So we know that, emotional well-being refers to the understanding and awareness that a person has of their own emotions, how well they are able to label them, identify them, but also how well they are able to manage them through different situations. And the early years is such an interesting time full of so many changes, so many fascinating things. You've got their physical growth, you've got their development and sorts of, social interactions. They come out into new environments, such as starting nursery. And so all these changes, they might be a lot. They're a lot for, 0 to 5-year-olds. And in order to, help them enjoy their play, help them enjoy, their independence, help them, communicate how they're feeling, we have to, as practitioners, have that positive and consistent attachment with them. And poor emotional well-being in the early years is often associated with negative outcomes in later life, such as difficulties building and sustaining relationships. Also, difficulties, with involvement and engagement in school in the later years. And it's interesting that approximately 70% of children who actually experience mental health difficulties or low emotional well-being when they get into their adolescence have reported to not have had appropriate support at a sufficiently earlier age. So we want children to be able to reach these emotional developmental points, being able to self-regulate. And one of the ways in which we can do it is through attachment. So from birth, straight away, we form these emotional bonds with people. And an attachment allows us, to have a secure base to explore, learn our environment. And if things get a bit difficult, a bit tricky, we know where we can go back to for support and familiarity. So that attachment allows, an early picture of a relationship. And children often mirror behavior. So this is critical in establishing that mental foundation that the child has, that they will use to interact with their peers, other adults, and also how they feel about themselves. So it helps them a lot with, their independence and also their self-esteem. So this idea of attachment is implemented a lot in early years settings, and primarily through the idea of that key person approach, that key person system. So whenever a child enters, a new place, a new nursery, reception, they're usually assigned to that key person, someone that can work with them and is assigned to tailor the support to that child's individual needs. And I think it's important that whilst there are, developmental stages and sort of, that checkbox that people do, it's still so important to recognize that checkboxes aren't real life. They cannot encompass all children. Children are very unique. And this is why I think a key person is completely essential for children in the early years. It helps that child to feel safe, familiar, and confident in their surroundings. Also helps to create a positive and enriching environment for the child. And also with the key person, what it helps to do is bridge that gap between home and also school. So by communicating and having a positive partnership with parents and carers, you are seeing, perhaps what was the child doing before they came to me? What are their comforts? What are their interests? How do they usually behave in certain situations? And also, in light of the pandemic as well, children, haven't been out much, they haven't been interacting with other children. They may have gone through some trauma in the family, bereavement in the family. And by having these conversations with these parents, we're able to get an all-round perspective on what's going on for the child. And by getting that information, we are able to create a tailored plan to know how best to support this child. And another thing that we can do to help children with how they regulate their own emotional responses to situations is this idea of co-regulation. So this is the interaction between us as early years practitioners and also the child. And, scaffolding and modeling has been mentioned quite a lot already, actually, but this is achieved by adults scaffolding the child's response. So an example of that would be, say I was playing with the child one-to-one, we were having a good time just playing Lego together, and my Lego tower fell. And, I was working really, really hard on that and it fell over. So one way I can scaffold and, show the child perhaps how to identify their emotions and express them is I can say, oh no, my Lego tower fell over, and that actually made me really, really sad. And by just identifying, the emotion and what created perhaps that emotion, allows the child to, think about perhaps, how to share their emotions later on in different situations. And another thing that you can do, if it's not expressing your own emotions, it's observing their emotions and reflecting it back to them. So take the same situation of the Lego tower falling over. And if Zainab's Lego tower fell over, we can say, Zainab, you seem really sad because the tower that you were working on, it seems to have fallen over. Is that right? How are you feeling? Tell me more about that. And it's so important when we do ask that question to allow a good amount of time for the child just to speak. We've done our question now, and it's good to just have that child think for a moment, reflect on, am I feeling sad? Am I not feeling sad? So allow them time to just process how they're feeling, and they might be able to communicate that back with you. And that ultimately helps with self-regulation. So evaluating their own emotional response and making a conscious decision on how to respond to that. And that does help with their resilience in the long term, being able to perhaps bounce back. I like to say bounce back in difficult situations. Think, okay, I know I felt really bad in that moment. What can I do now? So let me just give you an example, step by step. So first thing I'll do is speak to the child. Seems very, very simplistic, I know, but it is very valuable. So after that situation happens, you can say, let's go and sit over there together and just have a think and a chat about what happened. And here we can use that scaffolding, state their observed emotion back to them. So Zainab, you seem sad because that Lego tower that you're working on fell over. Is that correct? How are you feeling? And then invite them that space to just communicate how they're feeling. And it may be verbally, but it also may be non-verbally. That's why it's important to have, cards at hand, papers at hand, pens, so they can express how they're feeling through perhaps drawings. And think together, what can we do that would make you feel better in this moment? And once you come up with a solution together, you might have to, provide suggestions, but encourage that child to try it out and ensure them that, you will be there to support if things get a bit tricky again. So you can say, I will help you go back to that area and stay with you as you build it. So you're showing again, that the idea of attachment, you're being sensitive and responsive to them. And later on, refer back to that solution. You could say, I was so impressed with how you gave that Lego another go. And you use the ideas to think, how can I make that Lego tower stronger? And it made you feel better. So I'm very proud of you. It's so important to have that, encouragement, and also show the children, how proud we are of them, because they're fantastic beings, honestly. And so giving that praise is so important. And like I said before, it's important to recognize the uniqueness of each child. Not each child is going to want to communicate verbally. Some children may not feel comfortable, many children may not speak English at their first language, so it's wrong to assume that perhaps verbal communication will be their main form of communication. So we can use pictures, we can use zones of regulation cards with emojis, traffic light systems as well. We can also, use cards to perhaps point to the situation that made them a bit sad. But it's also good to recognize that perhaps they can have a timeout card, time to reflect card. That's what I like to call it. Just so that they're aware that they can have that time to reflect by themselves if they want, or I can just sit with them there. So it's important to be quite creative when supporting children with their emotional well-being. And this is one thing that's very important, that continuous and high quality observations. It is not enough that we just have one observation and call it a day. We know that children, experience many different emotions throughout the day. They go through many different changes and many different transitions. And a continuous and high quality observation would be one that we are able to see how their behavior and perhaps their reactions to situations vary on different days. Are there any sort of patterns that we see? What are the antecedents to that behavior? What happened before? What was behavior? And what happened after? What was their consequence? How did they respond afterwards? And by doing that as well, we are able to create an all-round picture of, that child and how they respond to things, how they interact. And therefore we can get a more tailored approach to how we can support them. And observations, they don't just stand alone. Like I said, having that positive parent-carer relationship is important as well. To find out, perhaps what happens at home, is what happening at home affecting what we're seeing today? How can we work collaboratively with the parents, because supporting emotional well-being doesn't just start and stop in the earliest setting. We want it to carry on throughout different parts of their life and later on in their life. So having that discussion with the family is very, very important as well. So some of the things that you can do in an earlier setting, if you see that the child's becoming a bit, distressed or a bit frustrated doing a particular task, or perhaps the separation from their parent and carer is making them very, very upset in the morning. Some of the things that you can do just to take them back to that psychologically safe and calm space. You can do some story time with props where you can scaffold emotions together. It's a bit more of a creative way. You do it with dolls as well, and I know they've got the world toys as well. You can also do a sensory box as well. So this comes back to the uniqueness of each child. We've got children who are neurodivergent and perhaps would prefer a sensory box, something that will make them feel calm and reduce their anxiety. Also breathing techniques as well, because when we are anxious sometimes we begin to get panicky, and breathing we start hyperventilating, and we might want to just take some time to just focus on our breathing and calm down. So here are just some examples that you can add. And sorry, just one of the things in this box here, we've got physical play. So physical play and physical health, diet and sleep are also very, very important for a child's emotional well-being. I think it will be discussed a bit more later on in the conference. But physical activity and play has such a key role in producing neurons associated with learning, memory, and also emotional regulation. And that good nutrition is important to ensure that they get the right amount of energy to support this. And also a regular bedtime as well. And by getting this sort of information, it's important that we talk to the parents. Parents may not be aware of this, but I think research, surprisingly, actually 69% of parents were actually not aware that the early years was such a critical and crucial time to establishing a mental foundation for children. So again, it's discussing with the parents, perhaps providing with some support. Because the prices of living now are increasing. It's very difficult. Gas, electricity, there may be difficulties that the parents are going through, and we as key people in the children's lives, we need to find out what's going on, how can we help. We can also make them aware to breakfast clubs sometimes, or additional support. So finding out so much more about the child will really help in us supporting their emotional well-being. So if you are really concerned about the children's well-being, I would recommend keeping that key person system very established, constantly review it, discuss perhaps any sort of concerns with your colleagues. I know if you're a childminder, perhaps this might be difficult sometimes, you might not have that team. But if there's anyone any other fellow childminders, anyone else in the agency that you would like to perhaps talk to, I would recommend just having some back and forth of the ideas about how to support children. Perhaps speak to the mental health support team if there is one in the earlier setting, and bring the topic of the child back into subsequent meetings, just to monitor it and discuss with parents and carers. Keep that open door policy, as I like to say, that frequent back and forth. And also referral, and signpost to other support services. Many parents may not be aware. The school system might be a completely new thing for them. So making them aware, perhaps, that there may be parent peer support groups that they can go to, there may be baby classes that they can go to, and toddler groups that they can go to outside of school. So just keeping that constant communication with your team and also with parents and carers. So just to recap, practitioners, keep that early intervention and communication going. Be creative and responsive and empathetic in everything that you do with the child and the parents. Have that non-judgmental approach. Scaffold and model learning, and be creative with it. And develop that nurturing environment for the child. And for leadership and management, frequently review this key person system, encourage that supervision and those discussions within your team. and that good up-to-date staff training in child development. And also, one thing that we cannot forget when we're talking about supporting children's emotional well-being is looking at and reviewing our own well-being. And please take that into consideration as well, because sometimes it does get a lot. So it's important to think about, how can I manage this? How can I manage these difficulties? How can I manage myself in the best way to help support these children? So some of the resources I've got here, so we've got the Anna Freud Center, the Early Years in Mind. They've got many, many resources, videos, clips, sessions that would be helpful for early years practitioners to look at. We've also got Keep Your Cool toolbox. So again, it's a supporting children with their self-regulation. And also we've got a free online training supporting children with their mental health and well-being. This is from the Open University, and it's got many, many sessions that might be helpful for you all. Just want to say thank you all for listening. It's been great to be here today.
Aaliyah, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much for your contribution and really giving us so much practical guidance on the key role we've got to support children's emotional well-being in the early years, which, as you say, is at the heart of lifelong emotional well-being for children, young people, and adults. So I should be saying now that I'm really pleased to welcome June O'Sullivan from London Early Years Foundation, who is definitely joining us. But I can't see June on my screen at the moment. So I'm just going to give Shagaya a slight heart attack and say that we'll move our running order the other way round. So we're going to talk together about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children's socio-emotional well-being, an overview of the EF's research findings and some thoughts about ways forward. So just bear with me a moment whilst I share my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to say a few things about East London Research School before we kind of get into this part of our session today. So East London Research School is founded by the Education Endowment Foundation, and we are absolutely committed to breaking the links between how well off families are and how well their kids do in school. We're also absolutely about overcoming that gap between what we know in early years education and childcare and what we do. Often it can feel that we've got so much evidence and research and people's opinions and advice out there, but how do we actually make sense of all of that and apply it to make a difference, to help that child who's really struggling every morning when their mum says goodbye to them? How can we bring the best information we've got to bear on the situations we find ourselves in as early years educators, as carers? So those are the two strands of our mission as a research school. But I'd also like to stress that we don't see education, including early education and childcare, as a magic bullet. And we remember that at the height of the lockdown, for example, we were one of Newham's emergency hubs, distributing over 1,000 emergency packages to families who are close to destitution every day. And we think that is a disgrace in a country that is as wealthy as the UK is, that we have such high levels of child poverty. And we think it's important that we tackle the root cause of child poverty. But meantime, there are things that we can do now, we can do in early years, we can do in the school sector. And that's what the focus of this afternoon is about. So as Becky was saying earlier, we know that by the end of the EYFS, the gap between children eligible for free school meals and all other children is roughly 4.6 months in usual times, and it has been for many years. And the research that Becky shared with us from the EF is suggesting that that gap may have grown quite significantly. It would be nice to think that children in the early years are young and they've got plenty of time to make up that ground. And of course, there's a lot of variation at child level. We know lots of children from disadvantaged backgrounds do really well in their early years setting and in school because of the great support they're given. But the big picture is not a good picture. The gap doubles on average by the end of primary and doubles again by the end of secondary schooling. Now, we could get really depressed about that at the moment, or we could turn that on its head and say that the early years are the crucial years for making a difference to children's lives. And that's why we're all here today. And that's why Professor Iram Siraj's keynote later is so significant. The early years are the crucial years for improving children's life chances. Otherwise, we end up with a situation that our young people eligible for free school meals are far less likely to get the grades they need at GCSE to have all the opportunities we'd like them to have later on in their lives. So a lot of the focus of this afternoon's conference is on that gap between what we know and what we do. And we don't think that knowing more, understanding the research better, is a magic bullet that's going to solve all problems. But we do think, like Becky Francis, that evidence-informed improvement is a process that has more integrity and holds greater promise than any of the alternatives. If we can understand and use the best research and evidence in the way, for example, that Aaliyah was outlining to support children's emotional well-being, in the way that Fliss and Melissa were outlining to support children's communication, that gives us the best possible chance to promote fairer life chances for all of our children. And we see that every day. We see the response of the children to the sort of work that Fliss and Melissa and Aaliyah are championing, and how it makes a difference to those children and their families. How can a research school like East London Research School help you with this as a practitioner? Well, the Education Endowment Foundation does a big job of synthesizing the best research and evidence, so pulling it together and making it accessible and easy to read. We mobilize it through our research school network. So we use it to make a difference to children's lives every day, every hour on the ground. We're mobilizing the evidence, putting it into action to support better outcomes, better emotional well-being, better health for our children. And thirdly, generating. So as Melissa was saying, at the moment, we are generating new research. We're generating new knowledge from research about how children may be helped with their early learning about number and pattern through picture books. Particularly want to highlight the early years toolkit. You can search online for EEF Early Years Toolkit. The toolkit gives you a top level view of the sorts of steps we might take to improve the quality of our provision, how well supported those steps would be by the best evidence we have, how expensive it's likely to be to take those actions, and what the likely impact is in terms of children's development. And you can see there that communication and language approaches of the sort that Melissa and Fliss were talking about, implemented well, are backed up by very strong evidence. They're not expensive to put into practice. They certainly are difficult, but it's not expensive. And the impact, if we do it well, is 6 months for those young children. 6 months. That's so significant when we remember that a child's vocabulary at 5 is strongly associated with how well they'll do throughout their schooling. What a priority to know about and to focus on and to do our best to address. So in the light of all of that, the research from the EEF on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we think, is really important. And we're flagging that as a research report that we think it's really useful to read. And what we're going to do today is just to give a little bit of context to some of those findings which is why I'm so pleased to be joined by Shagaya this afternoon, who's assistant head teacher in Tower Hamlets, and is going to tell us about some of the things she and her team have been noticing in those 2 schools where she's assistant head teacher. So over to you, Shagaya.
Hi, thank you, Julian. So what we have noticed across both of our schools is that there's been a significant decline in children's sustained shared thinking, where previously we'd have children focusing on an activity with an end goal in sight. We're almost having to go back and supporting them again. We are having to nurture the children to let them know that they can filter out those noises around them and being able to really focus, whether it is on their play or during the carpet session with an adult during the directed time. With our community, with both of the schools that I'm at, there is the issue of overcrowded housing. So we have had many families during the times of COVID where they didn't really have access to gardens, they didn't have access to go to balconies. Some do have more than one generation of their families living with them. So it prevented those opportunities, and where children were able to come in and we were able to teach them those strategies, they've now missed out on those crucial points, being able to kind of sit down and really concentrate on their thinking, to be able to think about what it is that they'd like to do and how they want to complete those tasks. With regards to self-regulation, we are seeing children again needing more support with their self-regulation. Similar to what Alea said earlier, we are having to do a lot of that kind of co-self-regulation at the moment. There is a lot of support there being for children available. Our children are struggling to, not struggling, they're finding it a challenge to be able to really regulate their feelings, to regulate their emotions. Where in the past, sometimes we may have had some children that could settle within a matter of weeks at the beginning of nursery. This particular academic year, we've had children where it has taken them up to a term, sometimes a term and a half for them to completely settle. They found it really hard to be able to spend a long time at nursery. So we have had to work with families, work really, really closely with them, thinking about, is it that there's a bit of a sensory overload for children? Because maybe they have come from homes that they've not had many resources, they've not had many toys to play with, and then suddenly they come into nurseries with lots of other children, they're having to share, and the concept of sharing, you know, children don't really like to share the best of times. So if you've not shared for a couple of years and we're having to kind of redo that again, we are finding that we are working with the children a lot more. Obviously, we've had parents that had to work, so there were those pressures for our working families, as well as families that didn't necessarily, that weren't working during that time, but yet they had children that were in secondary schools, and they've had to be able to compromise with children that are older, as well as the siblings and their other younger children, to be able to work together. And this is where those boundaries have not been in place that schools have historically been available to do with families. So again, we are doing a lot of work with our families, with our parents, thinking about how we can kind of go back to those stages that we almost worked for many, many years to build those relationships. And now we're having to kind of start again, because some families are new in our school, so they don't really know us too well. And if you've not been around many people, then you're having to start again. And if we have had families with siblings, that's almost made it easier. But again, because of lockdown and those struggle and the challenges to be able to support their children, the routines have gone. We had a child in reception at the beginning of this year who didn't want to come in. He cried every day for about 2 months. And in the end, Mum was really honest and said he just wants to go home and play on the iPad because that's what he has been used to. So we have got some of those that we are dealing with as well. With regards to behaviour, it's thinking about how we can support our children and developing their patience, talking about what they want. A lot of our children experience various traumas during the times of COVID, whether it was the fact that they lost family members, they didn't have time to see their grandparents, they weren't able to go out or see their cousins because there is such a close community in Tower Hamlets, and those family relationships are very, very strong. And everybody was so conscious of not going out that these children we're now having to work with and thinking about those traumas that we want to support them through. Another thing that we've seen that we are working on a lot more again is the physical development. Obviously, some of our families don't live near a park, so they weren't able to access that. If they didn't have the gardens, they wouldn't have those large equipments for the children to be able to use. I was speaking to one of my nursery nurses last week, and she said that there is a child that has just started as part of our January intake who's still very reliant on her because she doesn't like to use the balancing beams, and when she does, she needs to make sure that she's there to hold her hand. She's so dependent on this particular nursery nurse that a couple of days ago a nursery nurse wasn't in, and she had told the mum, oh, you know, I'm not going to come in tomorrow because I have an appointment. The mum didn't bring the child into school because she knew that she wouldn't be able to then access the provision that we've got available. So there is a lot of dependency on our adults at the moment, especially when it comes to physical development. Our children need a lot more time to kind of make those mistakes, to fall over from a balancing beam, to fall over from the climbing frame, and then to kind of let's get back up again and do this again. So it's just thinking about how we can build those how we can develop their independence, rebuild their resilience again, and just supporting the children through these challenging experiences they have experienced.
Great, thank you, Shagaya, because I think that gives us some of the kind of human stories that many of us will really relate to around the research from the EEF. And we've also seen that with lack of access to health visitors, lack of access to children's centre services, with the best will in the world, Zoom calls with your health visitor are not the same as attending clinic. And as a result, we've seen lots of families struggling to support their children's development in key steps like moving from bottle to cup, like moving from wearing nappies to being toilet trained. So a lot of pressure on our early years sector. And again, really emphasising there the importance of the work that we all do. We've already heard from Phyllis and Melissa about the critical importance of children's early language development. And where children are struggling with this, they really are depending on us to give them the best possible provision. And we have got this, okay? As a sector, we know how to respond to these difficulties. We know from the evidence that high quality early years provision is good for all children, but it's especially good for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And that by attending high quality early years provision, children are much less likely to be identified as having SEND later in their school career, for example. So high quality early years, this is where so much of the action is, why it's so important that you're all joining us here today to make a difference for our young children. So here's a couple of calls to action before I hand over to June, who I'm really looking forward to hearing in a moment. So use the early years toolkit as a focus for that professional discussion in your team about the best bets for improving the quality of our provision. Have a look at the evidence. Have that professional conversation in your team about where is the best place for us to put our efforts. We know from the EEF research that it looks like children learning English as an additional language have been hit hardest. So let's think really hard about the needs of our children learning EAL. And we have a free webinar about multilingual children in the early years on the East London Research School website. Let's think really hard about the concept of the silent phase. We do know that young children who don't speak much English will be quite overwhelmed when they come into their setting and may not be able to say much. But they depend on us to use the sorts of strategies that Fliss and Melissa were talking about to get playing and interacting, because you learn a language by speaking a language. You don't learn a language through an extended silent phase, soaking it up like a sponge. We have got to have a hands-on approach to supporting our children to learn English as an additional language, as well as remembering that multilingualism is a great asset for young learners, and we need to treasure and nurture and value multilingualism, as well as making sure that we prioritize support for those children learning English as an additional language. We need that evidence toolkit. We also need our professional skill, judgment, and experience. Evidence can't give us all the answers, but it can point us in the best direction. But we need to use our professional skills with the evidence to develop what we call evidence-informed practice. We're not being led or dictated to, it's informing us. And we're here as London's research school on the east side of the city to help all of our practitioners to bridge that divide between the best research and evidence we've got and what we should actually be doing to support our young children as well as we possibly can in our settings and in our schools every day. So keep an eye on our website, because we are going to have some great stuff going on from the autumn for everyone in London in the early years to help bridge the gap between what we know and what we're doing in the early years. I'm really delighted now to hand over to June O'Sullivan, who's CEO of London Early Years Foundation. June, we're delighted to have you here, focusing on the important topic of children's health and physical development. So without any further ado, we're all ears. Over to you.
Thank you, Julian. I'm sorry to give you a heart attack a while ago, but actually I had signed in as a guest rather than a panelist. So I've enjoyed this so far today, even though I think I'm sitting in the hottest office in London. I'm going to try and share some slides because I noticed you were all using slides. So I'm going to try and do that, but if they won't work, I won't worry. Or do I need to send them to you to share? You're on mute.
You can share. No, it's terrible, isn't it? After all this time, you can share your own, June.
Okay, thank you. So really, it was most interesting to hear the mayor and the acknowledgement of us being the fourth emergency service. A phrase I coined myself over here when we were really just very fed up with the way we were being treated, and the issue of status is very important. So having access to good research informed information is really, really significant for us. And also a big congratulations to you, Julian, on your CBE, which I think is well deserved, and very pleased that you've got it, particularly as you and I both share a passion for standing up for the rights of children from the disadvantaged communities. And now that we've also joined NUM, we will hopefully be able to get much more involved in the research school. But what I wanted to talk today to everybody about was really about bike works and bike action research. And you may wonder why that is even an issue here today. But the issue is, if you take the line from disadvantage to health, you will find that child obesity is a major problem. And it is a growing problem, and it's not actually getting any better. Can you see my slides? Yeah, fine. So since 1992, so there's nothing new about this problem. We've had 14 obesity strategies and 698 reports telling us that obesity is increasing. And in 2021, obesity, particularly amongst children, increased by 21%. So the facts are there. This is a problem. The mayor of London, who we listened to earlier, set up a task force to try and look at child obesity. And it's a very complex issue. And I think that's part of the problem. It just looks so big, you just don't know where to start. And we decided to start on two areas. One was we'd look at the caliber of chefs in nurseries and what we could do to support them, but also what do we mean by physical development, and how do we create children who have a positive attitude, a healthy lifestyle. And so we thought we'd focus on one of the resources that most nurseries have, bikes. And it opened up a big discussion for us about what other things we need to look at in nurseries, because we take for granted certain things that everybody has in your nursery. But when is the last time you really looked at how we use those? So that was very interesting for us. And it was really driven by the staff who were really anxious about the obesity issue and the consequences of that. I don't know if you know, but for the NHS would be paying £6 billion a year on diabetes type 2. And that is a pretty enormous amount of money. It would solve the early years funding issue in a second and fund a proper service to children and their families. But one of the things that we also know is that obesity leads to declines in motor skills across childhood, and that is very important. Now, some people will agree to the standards of 60 minutes outside physical activity a day. At LEAF, we have 2 hours outside physical activities a day. It doesn't have to be 2 hours in a block, but over the period of the day, we should be out for at least 2 hours. But we did notice that children who are inclined to obesity are less confident and less inclined to want to be outside using the bigger resources that we had, including the bikes. And also, we were concerned also that children, and I don't need to say any more about COVID, because you've all said it today very, very eloquently, but I would agree, and we see this ourselves, that this is also impacting on children's ability to be confident. And poor motor proficiencies are also not going to help their sense of self and your sense of confidence about how you take things on. And so with that in mind, we decided to do some work. Now, there was an advantage to this because there's an organization called Bikeworks, which is a social enterprise just like us, that actually helps people to use bikes and train people how to cycle. And it does it across the piece. And it hadn't really done a lot in the early years. And I was having a chat with the guy who runs it, Jim, and he said, well, you know, we could probably give you some bikes. So they've been donating bikes to us over the last 4 years. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, such a generous gift could be properly used. And I wondered whether we were using them well enough and if we could improve them too. So we decided—
June, really sorry to interrupt, but a couple of people have asked, could you put your slideshow onto the show slideshow, so that, because people are struggling with the size of the print there.
Oh gosh, yes. I must put it on slideshow from current slide.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Better?
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
Perfect.
sorry, that's my fault. So what we wanted to do then really was think about what else were the issues? And the other issue we were finding, and again, this is not something you're unfamiliar with, was that actually a lot of parents couldn't afford to buy a bike, or were living in flats that were quite small and couldn't afford to store a bike, or were frightened to go to the park because they felt these were scary places and didn't want to take their children out. And then we wondered whether we should have a bike lending scheme for parents. And we sort of did a bit of testing on that. But actually what we decided to do was, let's think about how we use bikes in the nurseries in the first instance before we do anything more dramatic than that. Okay. So what do we want to measure? Well, very basically, we at LEAF use action research as part of our continuous improvement. And I think that aligns with what was said by Becky Francis earlier about information and about data and about research as a constant indicator of improvement. And, you know, action research isn't very hard to do. You think of your sensible questions, you think about what is troubling you, you think about how you might kind of observe or consider that, and then what you might do as a consequence. And it's a sort of circular process. But the first thing we wanted to know was, how are bikes used in the nursery? What do staff think about the bikes? Do parents think about how we use bikes helping their children learn and develop? And do regular use of bikes develop a positive attitude towards a healthy lifestyle? And so we decided we would use it across the 39 Leaf nurseries, but not do it in all. So we did it with 8 nurseries, and we picked areas where there was higher rates of obesity, more disadvantaged communities, slower development of gross motor skills, lack of resources, no storage space, i.e. parents living for the most part in small flats, and poor understanding of healthy lifestyles and the importance of exercise, and a bit of a decline in emotional well-being. So we picked those particularly, and 17 staff stepped forward to be our bike champions and to lead the process. What do we find? Well, parents are it was very interesting for parents. They saw bikes only in terms of physical development. And they also identify the weather and limited time as the biggest barriers to talking to children and to taking the children outside on their bikes. They considered, though, bikes as a key part of the nursery life, and they considered also that actually the bikes, learning to ride a bike was as much the responsibility of the nursery, and that actually was a sort of normal place where you would normally get that kind of learning happening. So that was very interesting for us because we hadn't quite seen it like that. And then they were about divided almost evenly as to whether we would use a bike lending scheme. What did staff find? In line with the raft of research that's out there, we found that bikes were used frequently and supported many elements of learning, including building confidence, which was sometimes surprised staff. Children had a variety of abilities in using bikes, but learning to brake was their biggest challenge. And that was interesting because the bikes that Jim was giving us, the brakes were actually not that good. And so what we did is we reviewed the way the bikes were being designed and actually funded much stronger brakes, funnily enough. So that was an interesting response. Most staff thought that they had sufficient space to enable the children to use the bikes, but the issue of the type of grass and ground suddenly became more of a problem. So the assumption in many local authorities, and I'm sure many of you out there have been in this position, where because of health and safety, you've removed grass or you have replaced it with safety surface or artificial grass, actually not great for bikes. But the children were very creative, and they turned the bikes upside down and started to look at the bikes as a sort of engineering project, and they made very good use of it. We followed their interest as well, and we found that some of the children would get very fed up with the bikes very quickly and would go off and do other things, whereas actually often the girls kind of created a narrative around the bike and used it as a conversation piece, which is back to Fliss's point earlier about conversation being a powerful part of what you're now calling Shrek. Staff were very intrigued by how children use the bikes more creatively and repairing them or supporting spinning schemas and the likes. And there were some great conversations from the children where they were obviously role playing out what they saw at home, where mum and dad had broken down and they needed a ride to the garage, or they were stopping at the coffee shop and they needed a coffee, but there was a queue, and what were they going to do? There was a few brilliant indicators of road rage where they were getting caught up in the delay that they couldn't get because of the road being blocked. So they were very, very interesting in conversations that came from that. Also, the process of observation really made the staff step back, and they realized that actually they were taking a lot of things for granted. So for example, one member of staff remember saying to me, I was watching this child on his bike, and the reason I was watching him so intently was because I was doing this project. I would have watched him before, but not with the same level of intensity. And what I noticed was he was stopping in a particular spot and then circling around this leaf in the middle of the pathway. And when she asked him, well, what was that all about? He said, that's the roundabout. And so he had created this own space, and then they could extend that. Because really quite often what we do with the bikes outside is we line them up, or we create a garage, or we create a parking lot, or we create a roundabout or a road or whatever. And actually we don't always follow the children's leads on this. We tend to sort of want to get it going for them. We often put numbers on the bikes or names on the bikes to increase mathematical knowledge or, literacy outside. But actually sometimes the children are much more creative than we can possibly be, and just by watching them we noticed that. And we definitely noticed that turn taking, teamwork, negotiation and role play was a big big element of using bikes, which we hadn't really, I think, taken enough value of. So, for example, in one of our nurseries, in Soho Nursery, the garden is underground, and the children became absolutely obsessed with the Green Cross Code. And that's probably because they're living in Soho on Brewer Street with very tiny roads, loads of cars, loads of taxis, and they became very fixated with that. And what often was quite bossy and quite sort of telling off about you not sticking to the rules of the road and you getting run over and be killed. And so there was a lot of also anxieties, I think, about where you are in your environment, reflected. And again, the staff said that's because they had time to actually watch carefully and really pay attention. So what next for us? So of all of this, there was some interesting kind of findings. So the first thing was we decided we definitely need to share the research across all of the Leaf nurseries and start to embed those findings and get people to rethink things. The second thing was what we noticed also was where we introduced balance bikes, the children became more confident riders of bikes much more quickly. And where we were inclined to be always getting bikes or bikes with stabilizers, we have now kind of configured that proportion, and now we have many more balanced bikes and fewer bigger bikes. We also reviewed our outdoor policy and the connecting to nature, because being outside watching the children in the garden so much more with so much intensity made us alert to the sort of principles of, well, what does outside mean? And we were reading at the time a lot of Richard Liu's book about, vitamin N and being outside, because we're doing a lot of work on sustainability. And that was very interesting for us as well. And thinking about, the nature in your own backyard. So, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in inner London with no garden and you're underneath the ground, or in a large garden like maybe Sheringham has, that actually you need to think about what does nature look like in that experience and how do you sort of develop that. And that was sort of byproduct of the research. It also made us question the whole power of action research as part of quality. And actually getting us really looking at the sort of standard resources that you have in a nursery. Do we really use them to the best? Do we think about them often enough? Do we have to wait for something really specific before we start thinking about doing some work? And actually it made us really step back and think, you know what? We really need to do much more of the small action research projects, not just waiting for big kind of developmental issues like a language delays or PSED or post-COVID, but actually small resources. Because we do know, and I think you've said it earlier, that actually resources are really significant in the pedagogical approach, no matter where you are. And so now we're looking at dolls, and we're looking at how we build a doll that's sustainable, that's attractive, that actually, and it's based on what the children are using the dolls and how they're using the dolls and what the children are saying about dolls. So, I think this is a continual thing that we can do across the sector, because it builds up our confidence to talk about pedagogy. And pedagogy is about how we teach, because how we understand children learn. And again, this is a sector that has a low status. We use odd language to describe ourselves. We don't talk about education in a kind of confident way. So the more research we do, the more we own these things, the more it builds the confidence. And then finally, we do think we should do more around bike lending scheme with parents. We don't think we put it to bed yet, that there is more to do. And we would be very interested in the sector joining us in some of this research about bikes and bike lending for parents from now on. So so thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I've kept the time. I've done it as fast as I can. The report is free on our website. It kind of looks like a blue report called Rethinking How We Use Bikes. Please feel free to use it, to download it, to have it, and to maybe encourage you to do some more work on similar things. But thank you.
June, our thanks to you. And we at our end of Newham are terrifically inspired by the work you've done about bikes and just the kind of simplicity of the approach, which is that if we want our children to develop their physical skills and confidence as bike riders, which they are going to need to be to live in the London of the future, we need to put more of an emphasis on this in nursery. We also need to lend bikes to parents so that children have enough time to practice.